Okay, let's do the password combination checker first because I found my error. If you remember correctly, I was telling you guys, like, the math just seems wrong, and I can't figure out why. So, Tyson, you missed that part. I kept on going, my math seems wrong, but it comes out right, but it doesn't seem right. And it was bugging me, so I had to do some double checks. And if you remember, we came in here and we did checks to see, is it a numeric digit? If so, it adds our combinations. If it's a lowercase letter, it adds some combinations. Of uppercase letter, it adds some more combinations. These are all the possible combinations it could be. And then we did math.pal, so we're going to find something to the power, and we did password.length, comma, combinations, and that was inaccurate. I got it backwards. It was combinations, comma, password.length. So it's the number of possible letters or characters it could be raised to the power of the length of the word, and that is the total number of combinations. So that is why that number seemed wrong, and now it is much more accurate. So if we come here and we specify, for example, our simple password, QWERTY, okay, we get a lot better representation. It still seems like tons and tons of combinations, which it is, don't get me wrong, it is. But it now takes a third of a day to hack QWERTY, assuming that they're not using a dictionary evaluation first. Remember, our process of checking was just checking on possible combinations. It was not checking for duplicated characters or repeated letters or sequential characters. There are some password checking libraries are out there. Some are open source, some you have to purchase, and they look for things like QWERTY, because QWERTY is, if you look across the top of your keyboard, it's right there. And they check not only this is what's known as a QWERTY keyboard. It's the one that's most commonly used, but it also checks for some less commonly used keyboards like the Dvorak keyboard. If you're not familiar with that, the Dvorak keyboard is a keyboard which is laid out entirely differently. If you use it, it is much faster and less prone to errors than QWERTY. The difference is, however, big difference, it's not as easy to learn. QWERTY, for some weird reason, is very easy to learn. And it has nothing to do with the way it was designed. The QWERTY keyboard was designed back in the days of mechanical typewriters. So that's a whole different thing. So if I have this as a long password, this takes 1.6 to the 28th power days to process. So that's a lot more realistic number. Not going to be hacked, thank goodness. Some of the other libraries, they'll even check for some of the common foreign language keyboards that you can run into. There was a really weird password that was starting to show up, and some researchers did some look into it. And it happened to be based off of the Chinese keyboard. And while the letters in English meant nothing, in Chinese it was short for, it was the symbols it generated was, this is my password. If I remember correctly, or something, or this is my password, or something like that. And so while if you use an English checking system, it would have let it through, but they were finding like up to 10% of the passwords in some systems had this really weird combination. So that's why they started checking, and they found out, well, wait a second, almost all of these people are in China. Why is that? And that was their password. It wasn't really, it was quote unquote strong. It was, like 9 characters. It was uppercase and lowercase and some other stuff. But when you took it to a Chinese keyboard, all of a sudden they went, oh, we see what's going on here. And so some of your password checkers and stuff are going to be smarter than others and check for things like that. So that was the first thing I saw that I wanted to make you aware of, for lack of a better term. Just fixing that little piece there. All right, now let's take a look at JSON. Was we talked about JSON the other day, but we did not get a chance to. I realized that I showed you how to save JSON, but I didn't show you how to read JSON data, and that's kind of important. So I wanted to look at that. I've got 3 separate things here. I have a config file that's in JSON. Ta-da. Ooh, everyone go. Okay. And then I have a coordinates.cs. This is a little subclass essentially. Very simple, has an X and Y coordinate. Very, very simple. And then I have a config.cs. And config.cs keeps track of, if you notice, x.size. Look, there's x.size. It has y size. Hey, look, there's y size. You see how this is going? Underpopulation, overpopulation, birth, and live start. And then also has always alive and always dead. And this is information I'll put this on Moodle for using with your project that you can import in or copy and paste into your project. So if you want to read in a JSON file like this one, it would then be able to go in and store it in this config application. You might say, well, how and why and what and huh? I don't get it. Well, I'm glad you asked. So if you look at the program.cs here, we don't need person. Program.cs. What it's doing is we show how to write something out as a config file, but then we say, okay, well, I want to read some data in. So I'm going to read in my config.json. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to go and take my JSON serializer. So I have to come up here to system.text .json has JSON serializer. I'm going to say .serialize or deserialize. So I'm reading in a string called JSON from a file, config.json. It's going to take in that file and deserialize it. So it's going to look at all these properties and start applying them as it sees fit. Here. This is a template type in C++. You probably heard of this as a template class. So this is a template class essentially inside of C#, same type idea. So deserialize, and we say what type of object is it going to create? It's going to create the config object, so it's something that we have, we use. And it says, well, what am I deserializing? I'm deserializing this string here. And so I called this config C2, and then you can see, okay, here's C2.alwaysalive, here's C2.alwaysdead, and I can get my different properties out of my config class. So if I run this, here's what the default string would look like. And now if I read this in, here's my generic list, here's another generic list, and here's the numbers based upon this information. So once again, it's very, very simple to read in data from a JSON file and process it. Now, here I did not specify where config.json is. So I want to show you where that file is actually, because believe it or not, it is not this config.json like you would think. So if I right click and go to open folder in File Explorer down at the bottom, when it goes to look for a file, you got to go to bin, which is short for binary. That's where it's created. Debug, netcore app 3.1, and then there is the config.json file. It actually loads. I've got this loaded up here, so I'm using the size 250 by 250. If I want to create my X size to be 750 by 250, and run this. Oh, I didn't specify size. Let's do birth. Birth is 1. There's the birth. There's my 1. So that's what's being updated and stuff like that. So notice how very, very simple it is in order to read this data in, process it, and get it stored inside of a file. In this case, a config file. So when you're working on your game of life project, I can give you data. We can all start from the same and see how the code gets generated out. And that's going to be our first step, is how do we go through this process? Well, knowing that I have an X and Y size, so I can kind of manipulate how big things are, how I can look for if something's underpopulated or overpopulated, which is going to cause a death situation, how many need to have for birth, how many people are going to be randomly created so it started off, all those types of things. So just something to kind of get started on, let you kind of work on. I want to be caught up on that type of stuff. I know those are all things that you needed to have. There's nothing else that we need to do as far as today. Other than work, I wanted to give you time to work on projects and ask questions if you had questions and stuff like that. For calculating the password complexity, we've already talked about that. Next week is the last full week of classes. There is a we'll talk about regular expressions. The project will be due the following week, and we'll have one final quiz over all the stuff that we've covered since our last quiz. So we'll talk a little bit about XML, JSON. I think we got to talk about graph problems. I think we'll talk about password complexity and regular expressions. So anyway,
project that we're supposed to be working on right now?
Excuse me?
Do we have a project we're supposed to be working on right now?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh no, I don't want them to hear that, right? Give me a second to load back up. We're on class. I go to right class. Ba-dum-bum-bum. Game of life. So.
Oh, okay. So yes. So I guess I kind of thought I was like, wait, never mind. I brain. Dang.
Okay. So yeah. So I'm going to add in the config class, the coordinates class, and the sample JSON file for you guys, just to kind of give you guys a head start on that. Okay. Right. One of the cool things that C# does with this process of reading in is if it sees a property that does not exist inside your config class. So let's just take an example of I've got this string out here. I don't have a property called foo. What's it going to do? Is it going to blow up? Well, if I read this, boom. Notice that it works just perfectly. And what's happening is if it sees a property that it doesn't know what to do with, it ignores it. I mean,
Good.
I think that's just so perfect. Now, what happens if there's no file that it or no property that it expects? So let's say I take out X size. There should be an X size. So if I go and I run this, and what I'm going to do is, I'll print out the X and Y size real quick. Notice that it still ran. And what it looks like it's doing, and I could be mistaken, but what it looks like it's doing is it comes in config, runs this config here, and then looks for all my public setters and says, oh, here's a data, let me set it. Here's a piece of data, let me set it. Here's a piece of data, let me set it. So that it winds up letting you see everyone all the stuff that you want. I think that's a really simple but brilliant solution so that if your JSON file doesn't match up with your class file that you're looking at, it's still okay. Now, in our case, we're only looking at a single config, but you can also, and this is also under the kind of cool category, in my opinion, you can get list of data. And so instead of assigning it to a single config like this, you can do it as a list and get a whole bunch of them. So if you have like a list of people, you could make a couple small changes, and a list is very similar to a list in Python, where it's it acts kind of like an array, but it's dynamic. It can grow and it can hold lots of stuff. And that just becomes really, really beneficial too. So I think this is a great little tool. It's real simple. Like I said, I'm going to post up the sample files for you in just a minute. And you guys can start working on that from there. So hopefully if you started working on the logic already, now you have a config file that you can pull in to load up your stuff and work on it. Just make it a little bit easier. At least I'm trying to make it easy. The other thing I wanted to let you guys know, and I will put this in the chat window. There's chat. There you go. For doing the course evaluations. So I think this just opened up either yesterday or the day before yesterday. So if you haven't done it yet, that's okay. We have a little bit of time to do it, but the earlier you can do it, the better. And feel free to put, be honest. I know that this is not necessarily the best situation, for lack of a better word, with having to, meet online, but in some ways we're trying to keep everyone alive. So, files. All right, so let's see. I can drag and drop files. Let's see. Hey, let me do that one. Awesome. And config and coordinates.cs. So there are all your files. And it's saved. Okay, so that should make your guys' life a little simpler as far as that goes. Knock on wood. I'm hoping it does. All right. Any questions for me as of right now?
No, sir.
Okay. I will let you guys go ahead and start working on projects and stuff. I'll stay on if for any questions that you guys do have. I'd be more than happy to help you with, of course. You guys should have the chat window so you can see what where to go do that. For Kate and Denise, you get 2 classes to evaluate me for. So please be kind. Otherwise, it's a double whammy. But anyways, kind of get you started with that. I'm sorry.
I don't see the files.
It should have just said you might have to reload them in Moodle.
Yeah, I keep refreshing it, or should I just completely get out and back?
Oh, it didn't let me save something. I'm sorry. Hold on. It saw a mistake in my stuff. Okay, try to refresh it now, and it should show up now.
Yep, there.
Okay. Yeah, it didn't let me save because I pushed back the due date a couple days, and it wound up the due date and the remind me date were the same, and that caused an issue.
Oh, I see.
So, okay, that's what that is. All right, so that's fixed now.